Hi, this is Andreas Goldthau. I'm the Franz Haniel Chair for Public Policy at the Willy Brandt School. And within the next few slides, I'll give you a quick overview of what we're going to do this fall term in our Introduction to Public Policy lecture. This is going to be an introductory lecture to public policy. So we're going to ask a couple of fundamental but very important questions in that lecture. The first question we're going to ask is, who actually delivers public policy? And how has public administration and the way we think about public administration changed over time? Just a couple of, years back, a couple of 100 years back to be precise, public administration essentially looked like this. You had a couple of people that were not elected, they were assigned roles by a monarch, and then they carried out public policy functions. Whether they were very capable of doing that or not was a second order question. That has obviously changed. We have come up with other ways of thinking about public administration and bureaucracy. So typically, we're talking about a big bureaucratic machinery these days, which obviously, when it comes to its organization, looks very different from the Tudor times a couple of 100 years back. So a lot has happened on the way, and we need to understand how we got there. But more importantly, we also need to understand the fundamental logics underpinning the various bureaucracy models that we have today. Another question we will ask is, how can we conceive of public managers and people producing public goods? Are they all equal? What is it that motivates them? For the sake of the argument, just think about a chess game. In a chess game, you have pawns and queens and kings, and all of them have different functions, and they can do different things. Now, the chess game has been used in the literature to also think a little bit about public managers and the motivation underpinning them. But there is more to all that. Public policies are not only carried out by public managers or public bureaucracy. There is non-governmental actors involved. We typically call them civil society actors. So a lot of different actors come together in producing public goods. And what we need to understand is, again, what motivates them and how they enter the process of providing public goods and contributing to public governance. Next, we're going to turn to the normative motivations underpinning public policy. A textbook case here is market failure. Market failure is a concept that stems from microeconomics, and we'll get into more details here during the lecture. But the long and the short of it is markets can fail to produce a good efficiently, and that typically creates what we call externalities. Externalities like pollution, for instance, is something that represents a prime case for public intervention. But it's not only markets that can fail. What we'll also do is we'll look at government failure. Governments can fail as well, and so can policies. Arguably, the pandemic situation in the US at the moment constitutes an interesting case study, at least, to assess whether this is a case of government failure. Judged by some indicator, it is. And that's something that we may want to discuss in further detail in the course as well. What we're going to do then is we'll look a little bit at what policy scholars call the policy cycle. So essentially the question of what makes it on top of policy agendas, how are policies chosen and implemented, and how can we make sure they are terminated if they don't work well. That also begs the question of how do we know they work? These are the things that we're going to look into more detail. And we're going to start with a very simple but important question, which is, why is it that some topics make it onto the policy agenda and others do not? We have a lot of really interesting case studies to look at here. A recent one, obviously, is Black Lives Matter, which is a topic that is important and salient, but arguably it's not the only one that is important and salient. There are others that need to be tackled as well. So the takeaway already here is it's not enough that a topic is important and needs to be tackled. A lot more needs to come together. And the literature gives us important insights into that. And that's why we'll study the whole process of agenda setting in more detail. Now, once you have designed the policies, how do you implement it? Do you do it in a top-down way or in a bottom-up manner? Essentially, how do you get the job done? The literature tells us there are various ways to think about this. And in fact, you can put state agents in charge. You can also involve social stakeholders. That extends to questions of legitimacy and acceptance, but also efficiency and effectiveness of the policies as chosen. But then there is an important follow-up question, which is once you have implemented your policy and once you know whether it works or not, how do you terminate it? You may want to terminate it because it has the effect you wanted, so you no longer need it, or because it doesn't deliver as planned. Now, the problem here is that it is not very easy to do put an end to policies. And as we have seen in the past, there are what we call now zombie policies that stick around forever, and it's really hard to terminate them. We'll look into those in the lecture. So there's a lot more that we're going to do in the lecture, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be fun for you. Let me just conclude with a few perks and what else you need to know when taking the seminar or the lecture. The first is I talked a lot about theory the last couple of minutes, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make this as tangible as possible. So we'll work a lot with descriptive stats, and a lot of examples come into play. We're going to do a few presentations, student-led presentations. These are all team presentations, and they're not going to be about theory. They're going to be about cases. So we're going to apply the literature to cases, and it's going to be essentially you deciding on the cases with my help, obviously. And in the end, maybe it's worth mentioning that you're going to write a policy brief. You're going to write a brief on a policy issue that you think is salient, that is important, and that deserves attention. And you're going to address the policy brief to a policymaker of your choice. So see you in class. We're going to enjoy this. Whatever COVID does to the term, we'll make sure we're going to have fun. See you then.